Hollywood sold perfection, but behind the lights, there were lives built on silence. Men who played heroes on screen while hiding truths that could destroy everything overnight. This is not about rumors. This is about pressure identity and survival in an industry that demanded control. 16 actors, 16 hidden lives, and the question that never stops echoing. How much of yourself can you hide before it disappears completely? Tyrone Power. Hollywood sold him as the perfect man. Strong jaw, noble eyes, a symbol of masculine elegance that women adored and studios protected like gold. But behind that polished image, there were whispers that refused to die. Whispers that did not fit the narrative the studios carefully constructed. Tyrone Power lived inside a system where truth was dangerous. His career depended on illusion. So, the illusion of a leading man who embodied traditional romance. Yet those close to him described a far more complicated private world. Stories of relationships that did not align with his public persona circulated quietly through Hollywood circles. Nothing confirmed, nothing proven. But the consistency of these accounts created a tension that followed him everywhere. The studios understood the risk. In that era, even a rumor could destroy a career overnight. So they controlled the narrative. Carefully arranged marriages. Public appearances designed to reinforce the image. Interviews that avoided anything personal. Power played along because he had no choice. Survival in Hollywood required silence. What makes his story unsettling is not what is proven. It is what is suppressed. In the idea that an entire identity could be buried under contracts and expectations. His performances often carried a strange emotional depth, a subtle vulnerability that hinted at something internal, something unresolved. Audiences saw charisma, but beneath it there was always something slightly distant, slightly guarded. And that is where the mystery lives. Not in scandal, not in confirmation, but in the gap between the man Hollywood created and the man who existed behind closed doors. A gap filled with speculation, with control, with silence. Because in Golden Age Hollywood, truth was not something you lived. It was something you hid. James Dean. He arrived like a shock to the system, raw, emotional, impossible to define. James Dean did not behave like the men Hollywood had trained audiences to admire. He broke the mold before anyone even realized there was one. Dean's presence carried contradictions, strength mixed with fragility, confidence tangled with uncertainty. On screen, he felt real in a way that made people uncomfortable. Because he did not perform masculinity. He questioned it. Every glance, every pause, every moment of silence felt loaded with something deeper. Off-screen, the mystery only intensified. Relationships that blurred lines. Stories from friends and colleagues that suggested a fluid personal life. Some claimed he moved between worlds without needing labels. Others insisted the truth was more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. Nothing was officially declared. But the ambiguity became part of his legend. Hollywood did not know what to do with him. He could not be neatly packaged. He could not be controlled in the same way as other stars. That unpredictability made him fascinating. It also made him dangerous, because audiences connected with something they could not fully understand. There was a quiet rebellion in everything he did. Not loud, not obvious, but constant. A refusal to conform to expectations that were never designed for someone like him. And that refusal made him different. His life ended before the industry could reshape him, before the system could smooth out the edges. What remains is not just a performance legacy. It is a question that never got answered. Who was James Dean when no one was watching? And why did Hollywood seem afraid to find out? Marlon Brando. He did not just act. He disrupted. Marlon Brando walked into Hollywood and quietly dismantled everything it believed a man should be. The voice was softer. The emotions were exposed. The strength came from vulnerability instead of dominance. And that alone made him unpredictable. But what unsettled people even more was what existed beyond the screen. Brando never fit inside boundaries, not in performance, not in life. He spoke openly in later years about experiences that did not follow traditional expectations, relationships that crossed lines the industry refused to acknowledge. He never framed it as rebellion. To him, it simply was a natural part of being human. That honesty created discomfort because Hollywood relied on certainty, clear identities, defined roles. Brando blurred all of that. He did not perform masculinity, he questioned it. And audiences felt it even when they could not explain it. Behind the fame, there was always tension. A man aware of the image built around him, yet unwilling to fully accept it. He could play the ultimate symbol of male power on screen. Yet in real life, he rejected the idea that identity should be confined. That contradiction became part of his magnetism. Directors saw brilliance, studios saw risk, because someone who refused labels could not be controlled. And control was everything in that era. Brando slipped through those expectations in ways others could not. His legacy is often described through his performances, but the deeper impact lies elsewhere, in the quiet dismantling of rigid identity, in the suggestion that a man could exist beyond what society demanded. He did not announce it. He did not explain it. He simply lived it. And that may have been the most radical act of all. Cary Grant. He was perfection, effortless charm, impeccable style, the kind of man Hollywood built its fantasy around. Cary Grant became the definition of sophistication. But perfection is often the most carefully constructed illusion. Behind that polished exterior existed a life filled with contradictions. Grant was not born into elegance. He created it, reinvented himself from the ground up, and in doing so, he built a persona so flawless that it left no room for anything real to exist publicly. Rumors followed him quietly, persistent, unresolved, stories of close relationships that extended beyond friendship. His long cohabitation with fellow actor Randolph Scott became one of Hollywood's most discussed yet carefully ignored arrangements. Photographs showed domestic intimacy. The industry chose to call it convenience, because acknowledging anything else would have shattered the image. Grant understood the stakes. His career depended on maintaining the illusion of the ideal leading man. Romantic, desirable, untouchable. Any deviation from that image could have ended everything overnight. So he played the role off-screen just as carefully as he did on screen. What makes his story compelling is the discipline, the constant awareness, the need to perform even in private spaces, to exist inside a version of himself that the world demanded. And yet there were cracks, subtle moments where the performance felt too perfect, too controlled, as if something real was being held just beneath the surface. Grant once admitted that he spent much of his life trying to become the man people believed he already was. That statement reveals everything, because it suggests that the real Cary Grant was always somewhere else, hidden behind the most convincing performance of his career. Clifton Webb. He did not try to fit in, and that was exactly what made people uneasy. Clifton Webb carried himself with a precision that felt deliberate, every gesture controlled, every word measured. It was not softness. It was something sharper, something refined beyond what audiences expected from a male star. Hollywood did not know how to categorize him. He was elegant in a way that challenged traditional masculinity. Not loud, not aggressive, yet impossible to ignore. His performances leaned into that difference. They characters who observed more than they acted, men who held power through intellect rather than force. Off-screen, the mystery deepened. Webb lived with his mother for most of his life. Their relationship was unusually close, protective, insulated. The outside world rarely penetrated that space. And within Hollywood circles, whispers followed him, persistent suggestions about his personal life that were never publicly addressed. But unlike others, Webb never seemed interested in correcting the narrative. He did not chase approval. He did not attempt to reshape how people saw him. That quiet defiance created a different kind of tension. Because in an industry built on image control, he simply existed. Studios tolerated him because he delivered. His performances were too precise to dismiss, too memorable to replace. Yet, there was always a distance. A sense that he was never fully part of the system, more like an observer moving through it. That distance is what defines him now. Not scandal, not confirmation, but the refusal to conform to expectations that were never designed for someone like him. Clifton Webb did not break the rules loudly. He ignored them completely. And that made him one of the most quietly disruptive figures of his time. Charles Laughton. He did not hide behind subtlety. He existed in contradiction. Charles Laughton was one of the most powerful performers of his era. Commanding, complex, unafraid to appear vulnerable or grotesque or emotionally exposed. He rejected the idea that a man had to be appealing to be compelling. But his personal life existed under constant pressure. Laughton was widely understood within Hollywood to be attracted to men. Yet he was married to actress Elsa Lanchester, a union that endured for decades, not because it followed convention, but because it provided protection. That duality defined his life. Public stability paired with private truth. A careful balance maintained in an industry that punished deviation. The marriage became a shield, a way to exist within the system without being destroyed by it. Yet the tension never disappeared. It surfaced in his work, in performances that felt layered with something deeper, characters who carried internal conflict, who struggled against forces they could not openly confront. Audiences saw brilliance, but beneath it there was always something more personal, something real. Laughton understood the cost of exposure. Careers had ended for less. Lives had been dismantled by suspicion alone. So he navigated carefully, not denying, not confirming, existing in a space where truth could survive without being spoken. What makes his story powerful is the balance, the ability to maintain both worlds without collapsing under the weight of either, to create art that hinted at truth while protecting the life that could not be revealed. He did not fit the mold Hollywood demanded, but instead of breaking it outright, he learned how to live inside it without ever truly belonging. Roddy McDowall. He grew up inside the system, not as an outsider, not as a rebel, but as someone who understood the rules from the very beginning. Roddy McDowall entered Hollywood as a child and never truly left. He watched how the machine worked, how identities were shaped, how truth was negotiated. That early exposure made him careful, observant. He understood that survival depended on control, not just of performances, but of perception, and he mastered both. Within industry circles, his personal life was quietly understood, not publicly declared, not openly discussed, but known. The kind of knowledge that existed in whispers rather than headlines. McDowall formed deep connections within Hollywood, a network built on trust and shared secrecy. He became a confidant to many, someone who knew more than he ever revealed. What makes his story different is the intelligence behind it. He did not fight the system. He adapted to it, navigated it with precision, choosing which parts of himself could be seen and which had to remain hidden. His public image remained intact, professional, reliable, approachable, exactly what the industry needed him to be. But beneath that surface existed a more complex identity, one that could not be fully expressed in the world he lived in. There is a quiet loneliness in that kind of life, the need to divide yourself, to exist in fragments depending on who is watching. McDowall carried that division with remarkable composure, never allowing it to disrupt his career. But the question remains, how much of a person can remain unseen before it begins to disappear? Roddy McDowall lived an entire life inside that question and answered it with silence. George Nader. His career did not collapse suddenly. It faded, quietly, almost deliberately. George Nader had everything Hollywood valued: strong presence, leading man looks, the kind of image that studios could build into something lasting. And for a moment, it worked. Then something shifted. Behind the scenes, Nader's personal life became known in ways the industry could not tolerate. Unlike others who managed to maintain separation between public image and private reality, Nader faced a different outcome. His relationships were not just rumored, they were understood. And that understanding changed how Hollywood responded to him. Roles became limited, opportunities narrowed. The system that once supported him began to withdraw. Not openly, not with scandal, but with absence. The kind of quiet exclusion that leaves no evidence, yet changes everything. Eventually, he stepped away from Hollywood entirely, moving to Europe where the rules were different, where identity did not carry the same consequences. There, he found a kind of freedom that had been impossible before, a life that did not require constant performance. That contrast reveals the truth of his story, not just about one man, but about an entire system, one that decided who could belong and who could not based on expectations that were never questioned. Nader did not fail Hollywood. Hollywood rejected him, and in doing so, it exposed something far more uncomfortable. That talent was never the only thing that mattered. Sometimes the life you lived outside the camera mattered more than anything you did on screen. John Gielgud. He belonged to a different kind of tradition: theater before cinema, craft before image. John Gielgud carried himself with a refinement that felt untouchable. His voice alone commanded attention. His presence carried authority that did not need to be forced. But even someone of his stature was not immune to the rules of the time. In the early 1950s, his private life collided with public exposure. An arrest in London brought attention he never wanted, the kind of attention that destroyed careers, headlines, judgment, a moment where everything could have ended. Yet, something unexpected happened. He returned to the stage, and instead of rejection, he was met with applause. Not polite, not hesitant, genuine. The audience chose to separate the man from the scandal. Or perhaps they chose to understand more than society allowed them to say openly. That moment did not erase the pressure. It changed how it was carried. Gielgud never turned his life into a public declaration. He remained reserved, controlled, allowing his work to speak while his personal truth remained largely unspoken. Yeah, but the incident left a mark, a reminder of how fragile acceptance could be. What makes his story powerful is resilience. Not loud defiance, not rebellion, but endurance. The ability to continue in a world that had already judged him. His performances gained a deeper layer after that, a quiet awareness of vulnerability. Characters shaped by internal struggle rather than external conflict. Audiences may not have known why they felt it, but they felt it. Because when a life is forced into silence, it finds other ways to be heard. John Gielgud did not fight the system directly. He outlasted it, and in doing so proved that talent could survive even when truth was pushed into the shadows. Dirk Bogarde. He understood illusion better than most, because he helped create it. Dirk Bogarde built a career on controlled image, a leading man carefully shaped to fit expectations. Charming, reliable, safe. But behind that image existed a life that followed a very different path. Bogarde lived for decades with his partner, Anthony Forwood, a relationship that was real, enduring, yet never publicly defined during the height of his career. The silence was not accidental. It was necessary. The industry demanded it. Unlike others who struggled against the system, Bogarde approached it strategically. He maintained the illusion while gradually shifting his work toward roles that reflected deeper truths. Films that explored repression, identity, desire that could not be openly expressed. It was a quiet evolution, one that allowed him to remain within the system while subtly challenging it. What makes his story compelling is the patience, the understanding that survival required timing, that truth could not be forced into a world that refused to accept it. So he waited, built credibility, chose his moments carefully. Later in life, he began to speak more openly, not dramatically, not as a declaration, but as a gradual unveiling, allowing the reality of his life to exist without apology. That transition reveals the cost of the earlier silence, the years spent maintaining a version of himself designed for public consumption, the discipline required to protect something deeply personal. Bogarde did not break under that pressure. He transformed it, turning restraint into depth, silence into meaning. And in doing so, he created something rare, a career that tells two stories at once, the one the world was allowed to see, and the one that was always there beneath it. Montgomery Clift. He did not enter Hollywood. He slipped into it like something fragile that did not belong to the machinery. Montgomery Clift brought a different kind of masculinity to the screen. Not dominant, not performative, but exposed. Emotional in a way that felt almost dangerous for the time. From the beginning, there was something unguarded about him. His performances were not built on control. They were built on vulnerability. Audiences could feel it even when they did not understand it. That quiet sensitivity set him apart from the rigid expectations of leading men in the golden era. Behind the screen, his life was even more complex. Clift moved through relationships that did not fit simple definitions. Those close to him understood that he existed outside the narrow boundaries Hollywood tried to enforce. But the industry could not allow that truth to surface. So it remained contained, known privately, protected publicly. The pressure of that dual existence was constant, to live authentically in private while maintaining an entirely different image in public. That kind of division does not disappear. It accumulates. It shapes everything. After his tragic accident, his physical appearance changed, but something deeper shifted as well. The emotional intensity in his performances became even more pronounced, almost as if the barrier between his inner life and his work had thinned. His characters began to feel like extensions of something unresolved. Studios saw risk, audiences saw depth, but neither fully understood the cost. Clift was not hiding in the traditional sense. He was surviving within a system that had no space for the truth he carried. Every performance became a controlled release of something that could not be spoken directly. That is why his work still feels different, still feels real, because it was never just acting. It was expression, and sometimes it felt like the only place he was allowed to be fully himself. Sal Mineo. He did not fit the mold from the beginning, and unlike others, he did not try to reshape himself to match it. Sal Mineo entered Hollywood with a presence that was intense and difficult to define. Sensitive, yet bold. Emotional, yet unpredictable. His breakthrough came early, and with it came attention that went beyond performance. Audiences noticed something different, something that did not align with the traditional expectations placed on young male stars. That difference became both his strength and his vulnerability. Mineo's personal life was not entirely hidden. Over time, he became one of the few actors willing to acknowledge aspects of his identity that others kept buried. That honesty set him apart. It also placed him in a position the industry was not prepared to accept. Roles began to change. Opportunities became limited. The system that once elevated him became uncertain, because he could not be easily controlled. And Hollywood depended on control. What makes his story powerful is the shift, the transition from rising star to something more complicated. A figure navigating an industry that no longer knew how to define him. His performances carried a rawness that felt increasingly personal, as if the line between character and reality was dissolving. There was courage in that. Not loud, not dramatic, but present. The willingness to exist without fully disguising who he was, even when it came at a cost. Mineo's life ended violently, suddenly, leaving behind questions that were never fully answered. But his legacy remains tied to something deeper than fame. He represented a moment where truth began to surface. where the carefully constructed illusions of Hollywood started to crack. And through those cracks, something real finally became visible. Anthony Perkins. He became a symbol of fear, but the real tension in his life existed far beyond the screen. Anthony Perkins carried a presence that was both gentle and unsettling. His voice was soft, his movements controlled. There was a sensitivity that made him different from the dominant male archetype of his time. That difference became his greatest asset, and his greatest burden. Before his most iconic role, he moved through Hollywood quietly, forming relationships that remained largely hidden from public view. Those within the industry understood more than they acknowledged, but the system required silence. Careers depended on it. When he stepped into the role of Norman Bates, everything changed. The performance was brilliant, precise, disturbingly intimate, but it also created a permanent association, one that blurred the line between actor and character in the minds of audiences. From that moment, his career narrowed. The industry began to see him through a single lens: complex, unstable, other. That perception made it difficult for him to escape the shadow of one performance. In his personal life, the pressure intensified. The need to maintain a certain image became unavoidable. Eventually, he married, built a version of stability that aligned with public expectations. But the deeper truth remained layered beneath that surface. What makes his story compelling is the conflict between authenticity and survival, between identity and perception. Perkins navigated that conflict with quiet restraint, never fully exposing, never fully denying. His performances after Psycho carried a different weight, a sense of internal struggle that felt less like acting and more like revelation, as if parts of his life were finding their way into his work. Anthony Perkins did not simply play complex characters. He lived within complexity, and that complexity never truly left him. Farley Granger. He moved through Hollywood with a calm that hid something far more intricate beneath it. Farley Granger did not chase attention. He did not demand control. Yet his presence in some of the most psychologically intense films of his time revealed an actor deeply connected to internal conflict. From early in his career, Granger understood the reality of the system he was part of. He knew what could be said, what had to remain unspoken, and how easily everything could collapse if those boundaries were crossed. Unlike many of his contemporaries, his personal life was not entirely concealed. He formed relationships with both men and women, experiences that he later acknowledged openly. But during the height of his career, those truths existed within carefully controlled spaces. The difference with Granger is clarity. He did not appear conflicted about who he was. The conflict came from the environment around him, not an industry that required selective visibility, that demanded certain truths remain hidden to preserve a marketable image. That awareness shaped his approach. He navigated his career without dramatic confrontation, without public declarations, yet without denying himself internally. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant awareness. His performances reflect that balance. Characters who often seem caught between opposing forces, drawn towards something they cannot fully embrace. That tension feels authentic because it was. Later in life, he chose to speak more openly, not as confession, but as explanation, providing context to a life lived within limitations that no longer held the same power. Farley Granger's story is not about secrecy. It is about navigation, the ability to exist truthfully in a world that only allowed partial visibility, and to do so without losing yourself completely. Tab Hunter. He was manufactured perfection, the kind of face that sold dreams. Clean, strong, effortlessly charming. Tab Hunter became one of Hollywood's most carefully constructed fantasies, a symbol designed to reassure audiences that everything they believed about romance and masculinity was still intact. But nothing about that image was accidental. Behind the scenes, the studios worked relentlessly to maintain it. Every appearance controlled, every interview shaped, every rumor monitored. Because they knew the truth carried risk. And risk was something Hollywood did not tolerate when profit was involved. Hunter's private life existed in complete contrast to his public persona. Within certain circles it was understood. Not loudly, not openly, but clearly. Relationships that could never be acknowledged. A life that had to be divided into two separate realities. What makes his story especially revealing is how close everything came to collapse. When a scandal threatened to expose him, the industry moved quickly. Damage control, narrative management, distraction. The system did not protect him out of loyalty. It protected the image it had invested in. That moment changed everything. From that point forward, Hunter understood exactly how fragile his position was, how easily the life he had built could disappear. And that awareness shaped every decision that followed. The need to maintain control became constant. The need to perform extended far beyond the screen. Yet there was something quietly resilient in him. He did not break under the pressure. He adapted, continued working, continued navigating a world that demanded silence. But unlike many others, he eventually chose a different path. Later in life, he spoke openly, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with clarity, a willingness to finally align his public identity with his private truth. That shift reveals the full weight of his earlier silence, because it shows how long he had been living divided. Tab Hunter was not just playing a role for audiences, he was living one, and it lasted far longer than any film he ever made. Rock Hudson. He was the ultimate illusion, the perfect leading man. Strong, confident, irresistible, Rock Hudson represented everything Hollywood wanted the world to believe about masculinity. And for years that illusion held, because it had to. And behind that image existed one of the most carefully controlled lives in Hollywood history. Hudson's identity was not just hidden. It was managed, structured, protected through contracts and strategic decisions that shaped every aspect of his existence. The studios did not take chances with him. They built layers of protection. Public relationships designed to reinforce his image. Appearances that left no room for speculation. Every detail calculated to maintain the narrative. But truth does not disappear simply because it is hidden. Within the industry, his reality was known, quietly acknowledged by those who understood the system, yet never allowed to reach the surface. Because exposing it would not just affect one man. It would challenge the entire structure Hollywood relied on. That pressure was constant. The need to exist within a version of himself that had been constructed for public consumption. To perform not just on screen, but in every moment of his life. That kind of control leaves no space for authenticity. What makes Hudson's story devastating is how long it lasted. The years spent maintaining an identity that was never fully his. The relationships shaped by necessity rather than truth. The silence that became part of his daily existence. When the truth finally emerged, it did not arrive gently. It came with consequence, with exposure that could no longer be contained. And in that moment, the illusion collapsed. But something else happened as well. The narrative shifted. Hudson's story became more than secrecy, more than control. It became a reflection of an entire era. A system built on image that demanded personal sacrifice in exchange for success. He was not just hiding from the world. He was protecting a version of it. And when that protection ended, so did the illusion Hollywood had spent decades creating. These stories are not just about Hollywood. They are about a system that shaped identity through fear and control. Some adapted, some resisted, all paid a price. If this changed how you see the past, then you are starting to see the truth behind the illusion.